Hi, welcome to the Impacting Lives One Teen at a Time, What Directors Should Know webinar. My name is Beth Yates. I am the Youth Services Consultant at the Indiana State Library. And my co-presenter today is Christy Franzman. She's the Teen Engagement Coordinator at the Hamilton East Public Library. And yes, those are pictures of us as teenagers. We didn't just include them to embarrass ourselves. We think it's very important to remember what it was like to be a teenager so that we can develop empathy with our own teen selves and with teens now. Empathy is so important when dealing with teens. So it's also a nod actually to a few activities we'll be doing later in the webinar where we ask you to reflect on your teen years also. A little housekeeping, this webinar is worth one library education unit, aka LEU. Indiana Public Library staff who view this webinar and wish to receive an LEU certificate should follow the policy outlined on the Indiana State Library's website, which states that someone in your administration or your HR at your library should create a certificate for you, as they are the ones who can verify that you viewed this webinar. So, a little bit of background before we get started. This training is derived from a national initiative to rethink public library teen services from YALSA, which is the Young Adult Library Services Association, which trained Christy and I on these topics. And the goal of the initiative is for us to bring this information back to our states to present trainings for teen services staff. So then why is this particular training aimed at directors, you might ask? Well, in short, we think that you as directors or managers or supervisors, you're the ones who have the power to implement change in your libraries. We recognize that teen services vary widely from system to system, but often teens don't feel welcome in the library, and we understand they're noisy. They can have attitudes. They don't always follow the rules, and they can definitely be a lot for staff to handle. But we really believe that the benefits of having teens in our libraries outweighs any negatives. So our hope for this training is that you, as change makers in your agencies, will leave understanding why and how libraries should be more intentional with their services to teens so that you can lead your staff in rethinking teen services.
So on the agenda today, first of all, why teens in the library? Why is it important for us to serve them? We'll also talk about teen development, some good things to know when interacting with teens. We're going to talk about connected learning, and finally, how to reach and serve teens in our community. So, directors, supervisors, and managers, why do you think it's important for libraries to serve teens and tweens with intention? We're going to spend some time talking about this today, but we first would like you to think of what your thoughts are on this question. So you can pause the video and think about some things, jot some things down, or you can continue on. Press play when you're ready. So some of the reasons that we think it's important for libraries to serve teens is it gives them something to do and somewhere to belong. There are approximately 14 million middle school and high school students that are on their own after school. And maybe not surprisingly, 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock p.m. are kind of the peak hours for juveniles to, juvenile crime or start experimenting with cigarettes and alcohol. So it's really great for libraries to be there and be that safe space and kind of keep them out of trouble. There's also a lack of funding for teen programs outside of libraries. So it's a great way for libraries to kind of step up and give them those opportunities. Libraries can help teens develop job skills, learn digital and traditional literacy, provide STEAM programming, and promote year-round learning. It's also a great place to learn social and emotional skills.
So when I go around doing trainings about teens for library staff here in Indiana, I often encounter two major topics that staff want to know about. The first one is how to handle behavior issues. And the other one is how we can serve teens, and specifically they want program ideas. Um, and because we know that those are two very important topics to library staff, we will touch on both of these topics throughout the training. We're actually going to start with that question of behavior, though. So why do they act like that? That's the age-old question. Teens are going through a lot of developmental changes during those years, and they contribute to their behavior in every way. Teens and tweens are actually developing in three major ways that we're going to talk about today. The first way is biological. This one's the most obvious. I think we're all familiar with puberty, so I'm not going to go into more detail here other than to point out that this is a time of new hormones bouncing around and also a lot of uncertainty and insecurity amongst many teens and tweens. It especially hits tweens hard. The second area of development is cognitive or brain development. And this brain development has a huge impact on behavior, especially, when we're talking about behavior in the library. So we will discuss this one in just a minute. And the last area is social emotional development, figuring out who they are, who they'll be as an adult, what their interests are, who their friends are, what defines them. They're kind of developing their personality. And libraries can play a huge role in helping them to develop those interests and skills. So we will definitely also discuss this one in a lot more detail. Going back to cognitive development, I mentioned that brain development has a huge impact on behavior, and this is why. The brain develops section by section, and it develops from the back up to the front. So one of the first areas of the brain to mature is the amygdala. And the amygdala rules your immediate reaction. So your fear, your aggression, your impulses, or lack thereof. But one of the later parts to develop is the prefrontal cortex up in the front. And that's the area that helps them finally rein in some of those impulses and use a little more forethought and reasoning. And this area develops quite late, actually. It develops as late as 25 years old in some males. So you can see what some of the implications of this development might be, right? The amygdala is telling them to act on impulse without considering consequences. And the prefrontal cortex may not be developed enough yet to say, oh, hey, maybe that's not a good idea. I did it one time and it didn't work out so well for me, so I shouldn't do that again. I'm sure that you all recognize this behavior from teens that you've known. And it's important to keep in mind that it is completely normal. It is not an excuse for poor behavior, but it is a reason. And if we know the reason why they're misbehaving, then hopefully it will make it easier for us to handle those situations. So keeping this cognitive development in mind, this brain development in mind, how might libraries adjust how they interact with teens? We're going to ask you to pause this video for just a moment and jot down some ideas you have for how your library might adjust their services for teens, the ways that you interact with them, the rules that you have for them, etc. And then once you have done that, you can go ahead and press play again. So here are a few of the suggestions that Christy and I have come up with for working with teens, some things that your libraries might be doing, or maybe you could start doing. One of them is just have more patience with teens, right? Now that you why they're acting that way, it might be easier to have patience with them. Cut them some slack when they're in the library, loosen some of the rules for them. If they make a little bit of a mess, it's not the end of the world. Don't punish them for things that are just annoying, messy, loud. Offer them forgiveness and second chances. If they make a mistake, say, you know, for today, if they make a big mistake, say, today, we're going to ask you to leave, but you can come back tomorrow and we'll try again. You know, you don't hold it on their permanent record. It's a temporary blip.
Definitely. You also want to be clear about the rules and what the consequences are for breaking those rules. I like to keep, in the back of my mind, our behavioral policy at your library and what exactly is laid out there. So that helps on a staff side, helps identify if they are breaking a rule, or are they just being kind of, irritating. So be very clear, and it helps them understand that this is exactly what's going to happen if you break this rule. You want to give them a warning, give them that chance to kind of step back and rethink what they're doing, and be fair and consistent. You may know some teens and they're good kids, and so you give them more warnings than the kids that are the troublemakers. So you want to be fair and consistent across the board, no matter who they are. And I think it's helpful to get to know them, get to know their names, especially the regulars that are coming in. That helps a lot with a rapport. And when you ask them to do something or to stop doing something, I think they tend to listen a little more if you've gotten to build that up with them.
Mhm. And just a side note, we will be providing some articles about handling teen behavior on a resource sheet, which will be available on the Indiana State Library's website on the same page where this webinar is linked. So that resource sheet and the webinar will be there together on the page. So moving on to social emotional skills, CASEL, which is the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, says that there are 5 social emotional learning competencies that teens need to develop in order to become fully formed and functional human adults. And they are self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. I think those are all relatively self-explanatory, so we're not going to go into more detail here today on these. But if you want to explore this more, again, we have that resource sheet and we link to the CASEL website on that sheet so you can explore these social emotional competencies further. But what we will say is that the Center for Early Adolescence at the University of North Carolina has said that teens have 7 developmental needs. And these developmental needs, when met, will help teens build the 5 social emotional competencies that they need. So if they get these 7 things, these 7 needs met, it will help them develop those 5 needs to become a fully functioning adult in society. So those 7 needs are physical activity, competence and achievement, so a sense that they are good at something, self-definition, so figuring out who they are, creative expression, positive social interactions with peers and adults, structure and clear limits, and meaningful participation, feeling like you're part of a larger group, a larger effort. Libraries do many of these things already, but teens will get the most benefit if we're striving to really meet these needs with intention. So looking at our programs and trying to be more intentional about meeting these needs. So keeping that social emotional development in mind, what can libraries do to help teens develop social emotional skills? And I'm going to pull up this slide again so you can look at it again while you pause the video and jot down a few ideas about what your library can do to support the 7 developmental needs of adolescents. Once you have jotted a few ideas down, feel free to hit play again and you can proceed with the video.
So the most obvious way that you might have noticed when you're writing down your ideas that libraries can serve teens is through programs. Programs provide ways to help teens develop several of the social emotional skills. Some examples, first of all, programs of all types, a variety is great. You hit more of those, but programs with physical activity. So for example, scavenger hunts, Nerf wars, some libraries have great success with those. Anything involving them getting up and moving their bodies. Projects that they can succeed at, your craft programs, cooking, volunteering, variety of ways to express themselves creatively, like writing, art, music, any way to kind of just let them express themselves. Also giving them time to hang out with peers, and also get to know trusted adults, your teen librarians or your programming staff, just giving them that time and that opportunity. And then meaningful participation, learning something new that they're interested in or that they didn't know they were interested in, maybe career exploration or a teen advisory board, having them have a say in some of the library activities for teens.
Mm-hmm.
So another piece to this, one last piece, is educational equity. We've discussed how brain development affects behavior and how we can help teens with social emotional skills. But there's another big reason that libraries are well positioned to help teens, and that's educational equity. So we're going to watch a short video that elaborates on that.
Our education system is supposed to level the playing field by providing learning opportunities to wealthy and poor children alike. But as wealth inequality has grown to its highest level ever, we're seeing the creation of what is, in effect, a separate education system for the privileged, while at the same time, our commitment to providing quality public education for all kids has waned. More and more people are falling into poverty, and that includes their children. More than half of American elementary school students live in poverty. These kids are less likely to participate in important enrichment activities outside of school, because for many kids, school is no longer a place where they can access activities like music, arts, crafts, sports, media production, and theater. This is especially true in urban areas, where funding cuts to schools for enrichment programs has been severe. By the time kids reach kindergarten, achievement gaps already exist between students of different backgrounds. By then, wealthier children will have spent over 1,000 more hours than their poorer classmates on enrichment activities such as music lessons, travel, and summer camp. They also will have spent time around other kids from similar backgrounds and around caring adults who work to curate a learning ecology for them. Enrichment activities are often fee-based, limiting access to only a portion of kids whose parents can afford them. Children and families of the top 10% of earners spend 7 times more on out-of-school enrichment programs than the bottom 10%. As wealth inequality has become more severe, test scores of wealthy and poor children have grown further apart, as have graduation rates and college enrollment. Poorer students are much more likely than wealthy students to attend schools where graduation is not the norm. We need a learning ecosystem that challenges inequality by empowering people to create opportunity together. The tools of the digital age offer new ways of expanding the reach and accessibility of learning to underprivileged youth who otherwise lack these opportunities. Young people today have the world at their fingertips. World-renowned lectures, a symphony of voices and opinions, peer-to-peer learning opportunities, and access to mentors are all a click away. If we leverage the tools of our connected age, we can create the makers and producers our era demands. If we ignore this reality, a majority of today's children could be left behind without the same economic mobility of previous generations. Our world is full of opportunities unimaginable just a generation ago. We need to make them accessible and achievable for all young people. Connected learning is an educational approach designed for our times. It makes learning relevant to all populations, not just the few. If you are a teacher or practitioner looking to get involved in connected learning, check out Educator Innovator at educatorinnovator.org. If you're a youth advocate,
So as you can see, there's a big difference in educational equity for youth, kind of a heartbreaking difference. But libraries provide free services to our community, whether they are in a lower socioeconomic status or a higher. Libraries are in a great position to be impactful on youth lives.
Oops.
Reflection time. So in order to gain a more personal frame of reference, we're going to take a moment to reflect on our own teenage selves and learning experiences. We feel it's important to reflect back in order to truly empathize with today's teens and to find ways for the library to connect with them. So we acknowledge that this may not, be all that pleasant to pull up these memories. And if you prefer not to think about it, that's totally fine. Think about a teen you know, or maybe you have a teenager at home. Think about them. And so after we ask each question, we'll ask again for you to kind of pause your video for 30 seconds or so and consider the questions and really think about them before proceeding.
So our first question is, can you remember a time when you learned about something in or out of school that appealed to your interests? And how did that make you feel? So just as an example, when I was a senior in high school, my English teacher had us do a really big research project, but she let us pick the topic. So I was able to select the Beatles that I was going to do my project about because I had recently discovered that they're the best band in the world. And so as a result, that assignment didn't feel so burdensome because I was able to actually learn more about something I was really interested in. And it made the learning easier. So again, we're going to pause and reflect for about 30 seconds. And then when you are ready, you can hit play again on the video.
All right, the second question we'd like you to consider is, did you have an adult in your life that supported and encouraged your interests? And whether yes or no, how did that impact you? So my example is I was interested in sports when I was younger, particularly volleyball. And the high school volleyball coach where I went to school supported that interest by running summer camps for us younger kids. And instead of just running them, she really was really great at looking for particular skills. She gave us feedback, gave me feedback to help me be a better player. She was encouraging and built my confidence. So I continued to want to play all the way into high school. And that attention and support made me feel special and worthy of her time and all of her effort. So I felt like I was succeeding at something. And so that made me, a little more confident and also just more into athletics in general. So go ahead and take some time and thinking about an adult or two that was in your life that maybe helped support and encourage your interests. Okay, so keeping your reflections in mind, let's talk about connected learning. Connected learning is where interests, relationships, and opportunities meet. For example, I'll use a girl that I work with right now. She's a teen that first came in. I know she came in regularly. I started picking up conversation and talking to her. She was always checking out just huge stacks of manga books, right? So I would talk to her, I got to know her name. She let me know her interest in manga and also anime. And one day she talked about, like, we should have an anime club, or she didn't call it that. She was like, we should get together with other teens. I wish there were other teens I could get together with and talk about anime. So, so I thought that's a great idea. Let's start an anime club, a monthly anime club. Get together, and watch different series. You can be with your people talking about all of these. So that example shows an interest. Her interest was obviously in manga and anime. The relationship grew as I talked more to her. And then as we started the anime club, the relationships with her peers, that she got to meet up with other teens that also had those interests, as well as our relationship, because I listened to her and provided that opportunity, not just for her, but for other teens that were in the community that were interested in anime and manga, and this was their opportunity to get together. So our relationship grew with that. I met other teens and was able and have been able to build relationships with them. She has also joined our teen advisory board to give input. She knows that her input matters, and so she was encouraged to start the advisory board. She has volunteered by writing blog posts for the library. So these opportunities have just continued to build relationships that kind of all get intermixed, and it's called connected learning. Taking something that they're interested in, making sure that that relationship is in place, and then connecting the teen with the opportunity that's relevant to their interests. So how else can libraries support connected learning? So in the library, how can we help teens develop interests, but also discover interests? Programs is a great way. A variety of programs and speakers can help them develop new interests, discover new interests, learn more about their interests. If they're, interested in photography, having a photographer, a professional photographer coming in and giving them extra tips, or even making that connection that maybe they can then contact that person to get more lessons, or, learn more about it. You want to talk to them, ask them. Your teen advisory board is a great way to learn interests. With relationships between staff and peers, libraries are in a great position for that. We, as we get to know them, we're providing them with a safe adult, a trusting adult to get to know in their life. And through programs, again, or just your teen space in your library, you're giving them that opportunity to meet other teens and to interact with other teens and develop those relationships. And as far as opportunities, these could be educational, career-based opportunities, but also social emotional connections, programs that are related to their interests or career paths that they're interested in. Programs that build social emotional skills that we mentioned previously. Now that we've discussed how the library can serve teens, let's talk about how to reach them. How might we might need to adjust, and rethink our services to do that. Can't always sit at the desk and wait for them to come in. I will say it works sometimes. If you're out there, it helps to be a presence in the space and get to know teens that way. But I think librarians who use a variety of paths have a larger impact on a greater number of youth. So generally, here's our advice for teen librarians. If you had teens coming in before COVID, or if they're starting to come back in, work on getting to know them by greeting them and introducing yourself, asking them their names and remembering their names, even if you have to write it down. Listen to them talk about their interests and make note of them. They have some really great ideas for some new programming or things, opportunities to bring to the library. It's all about building a trust with the teens and letting them know that you feel they are important and what they have to say is important to your library. So even during COVID, we had some libraries very successful, continue to stay in touch with their teens because they already had established relationships. They used Discord, Twitch, Instagram, and other gaming and messaging services. I've actually been able to develop new relationships through virtual programming. The numbers aren't big, directors. They're not big. So think quality over quantity. But the relationship building has been just wonderful, whether it's been through our TAD members, having our 2 libraries combined into one TAD meeting. I've gotten to meet members from the other library and build those relationships. We've had online gaming that has attracted a different kind of group than used to come to our board games. So it is possible to still develop those relationships even through virtual programming.
For some libraries, teens weren't even coming in pre-COVID. So, for others, COVID caused a major drop in teen participation. So we do recognize that it's difficult to reach teens sometimes. But the new reality means that now more than ever, we might need to rethink how we're trying to reach out to the teens. Again, like Christy said, you can't just wait at the desk and hope that they'll come in. Instead, it might mean meeting the teens where they are, if that's possible right now. I recognize it's more difficult right now. But find out where the teens hang out and bring the library services there. It might mean getting creative with schools. Can you ask the school librarian or an English teacher or the National Honor Society sponsors to nominate kids to join your teen advisory board? Maybe you can offer volunteer hours, or maybe it's just an honor to be on the board. Either way, this drives those teens to you rather than you waiting around for them to walk into your building. Teen advisory boards, just as a side note, are particularly great because they can be a real jumping off point for further involvement in library programming, and they offer leadership opportunities, social emotional skills there, and they can be done virtually right now, just as a side note also. The key thing to remember, though, is that we are still serving our patrons even if it's outside of the library walls. So try not to get stuck on the idea of getting them into the library. That shouldn't be the priority. Connecting with the teens wherever they are should be the priority. That might mean rethinking the way you do things. Maybe your reference desk is not staffed 24/7. Maybe you have some off desk times, or where the desk is not staffed, so that it frees staff to go and find teens where they are. And then eventually, if you're reaching enough of them outside of the walls, getting them into the library to use your resources there might follow naturally.
Definitely. That's a really good point. Remembering that connected learning is taking teen interests, utilizing your relationships, and connecting those interests to opportunities. So how do we make those connections beyond the library walls? So like Beth said, you look out into your community. Where are the teens, but also who else is serving teens? This will show you where they are or what's available to them. It'll help you develop future opportunities for those teen patrons. Just an example, I began attending Hamilton County Systems of Care meetings each month. Now I think we do them quarterly. But it was to learn more about the other groups and organizations that are serving the youth in our community, particularly youth in need. But it gave me the opportunity to learn about other services that are out there in our community and how they're serving youth, and to see how the library might partner with them. Where might we fit in without duplicating efforts? Where could we partner up and work together? So I'm now on the executive committee, and we've partnered several times with contacts that I made at these meetings. So it's been a really great way to make connections.
If you don't already have those connections in the community, though, then how do you discover them? How do you connections? One way is by using community asset mapping, which some of you might be familiar with already. But essentially, it's making either a physical map or a list or a graphic or something that physically lays out all of the businesses and organizations in your area that you might potentially be able to work with. So you can pull up Google Maps and take a look at what's around you, or even better, We really recommend that you walk or drive around your area, depending on which one your area is more conducive to. And the key is to make note of places that you might not normally notice. So it's good to do this in pairs if you're able to. You can make this as focused or as broad as you want. So, you can focus on places that could help you with teens, or you could do it for your whole library. It's a very great thing to do for a strategic plan, a 5-year plan. But the goal is ultimately to just open our eyes to the assets that are available in our communities. And remember that assets can be organizations, but they can also be people. So be sure to talk to your employees and your patrons also. We have added links to with more information about community mapping on the resource sheet that we mentioned previously.
So in summary, why is it important for libraries to serve teens? Libraries can help teens develop their social emotional skills, which, as Beth said, are paramount in becoming a successful functioning adult. Libraries are an equalizing resource in our communities. Think back to that video of educational equity when you are providing your services. How can libraries achieve this? Get to know the teens in your community and understand their developmental needs. Connect teens' interests with opportunities to discover and explore those interests. We can look into the community for helpful connections to enrich those opportunities. And you, directors, managers, and supervisors, can take this back to your staff. Let your teen librarians know that you see them, you see what their work is doing for the teens in your community, and support them. And you can also help the rest of the staff support them as well.
So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Christy and I. I'll put our email addresses up on the next screen. I did also want to remind you that some of your questions might be answered by the resource document that I keep mentioning that will be available on the Indiana State Library's archive webinar post for this webinar. So there they are. There's our email addresses: byates@library.in.gov for me, and franzmanc@hepl.lib.in.us for Christy. And we want to thank you all for watching. Again, if you need an LU certificate for watching this webinar, please have someone in HR or administration at your library create that certificate. And hopefully we'll see you at the next one. Thank you.